Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee. Visit their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or visit them online at metrojeep.com and drive off in your new Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram today. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you do, be sure to like it, share it, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for regular updates about who's coming up next in future episodes. You're in for a really good one today with my guest, Ryan Adams, on Baxie's Musical Podcast.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast.
Over the last 24 years, singer-songwriter Ryan Adams has released 29 albums. And I'm not even counting the 3 albums he released as a member of the band Whiskeytown from 1994 to 2001. But since then, as a solo artist, he's been able to rack up 7 Grammy nominations. Spin Magazine once wrote that Ryan Adams is one of rock's most talented songwriters. His music has been praised by Elton John, Willie Nelson, Norah Jones, Noel Gallagher, and dozens of others. He is an artist that has crossed multiple genres. He's released more than 25 singles. He has been a prolific songwriting talent, so much so that on January 1st of this year, he released 5 albums in a single day: Sword and Stone, Heatwave, Star Sign, 1985, and the live album Prisoners. Each one of these records was great. He's also about to release his previously shelved but heavily bootlegged album, Blackhole, an album which was abandoned in 2006. It's about to be released this month on both vinyl and CD for the very first time. But you might not know that because in spite of Ryan Adams' incredible successes, he's also been in the crosshairs of tremendous backlash and controversy. Controversy that stemmed from allegations of drug abuse, public feuds with fans and other artists. And in 2019, the New York Times launched an investigation depicting a long history of questionable behavior, particularly against women, including against his ex-wife, singer Mandy Moore, and several others. However, and this is not an excuse for the behavior or to diminish the seriousness of these allegations, but they have been just that: allegations for which he has never been charged, nor have they ever been proven in a court of law. Yet cancel culture doesn't always require those things. In 2020, Ryan Adams apologized publicly for his actions and the pain that his behavior may have caused. And all of this occurring amidst a lifelong struggle with severe depression, several medical conditions which have affected his hearing, the untimely death of his brother, all while Ryan was battling a growing addiction problem. Yet for some, the apology simply wasn't enough. And so for the last 4 years, this once beloved musical hero quickly became a man condemned. And while the mainstream music press has largely ignored his efforts to reignite his career due to the backlash, he continues to work, to write, and release records at a furious pace, 13 of them alone just in the last 4 years, some of which contain some of the greatest songs of his career. He also continues to tour relentlessly. In fact, Ryan will be coming to the area on November 25th to the Bosch Center in Boston at the Schubert Theater. He also continues to remain sober. Is Ryan Adams still a polarizing figure? He certainly is for some, but the world loves a redemption story. The question is, what's redeemable and what isn't? Today's episode isn't about taking sides or passing judgments. It's simply to look at the man's career, where he's been, and where he is right now. To talk about all of those things is my guest today, Ryan Adams, on Baxie's Musical Podcast. Hey, Ryan.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to figure out how to use the app. I'm like so not good at the Zoom app. It's like there's too many options.
I know, and you are not the only person I know who has had problems with it. I still find myself stumbling through it every now and then.
Well, I haven't had it for a while because I just, I don't do a whole lot of interview stuff, and
Sure.
and so I had it for the last round, and then it's some because I just I keep like a thing to write my novels in my phone, and then like a sketch thing, and I'm in a chess club, but that's kind of all that's in there.
Right.
So, but when I went to go like re-download it, it made me it was like 6 or 8 steps, and I was like, "Wait, what? What is it asking?" I was like, "Do you want to go pro? Go pro workplace." And I was just like, "Oh man, I'm sure this is good for somebody, but
It's not for everybody. That's for sure.
I guess we're living in the world of virtual offices now more still, and maybe for some people that was a something after COVID that was a really positive thing that they figured out, oh, working maybe I'm more effective if I work virtually, I don't know.
Well, it's weird. On occasion, I'll talk to someone who is so Zoom resistant that they insist on using something known as a phone, and it's almost not used
It's
to
the same
actually
thing.
having phone calls with people. It's the most bizarre thing. Uh,
Well, yeah, because that's because some people are old fashioned.
yeah,
But think about Art Bell. Art Bell did it out of one room in his house, even though he says he's like, I have a producer and my so and so, and I'm like that. It's like you just that's just like some lady that drank coffee at 6 p.m. like that was running that show. Like I mean, I love Art Bell.
of course.
But I mean, like I saw a picture of his setup once, and I remember thinking. I was like, I wish I could unsee that. It was literally like it was like in like it was in the guest bedroom. It was like
It was
so
it was like
weird.
it was like in a basement. That's exactly what it was.
Yeah, and he had like a pretty bad microphone that he had like I guess he put like the foam on the end and yeah, and he had his little his like I guess his phone line thing. Yeah, pretty wild.
But he held that show for an awful long time to talk to some of the biggest nutcases in the world, which is one of the great parts about that damn show.
Yeah, and also some people that later on it would seem turned out to be kind of, I mean, strangely when was on the money, he was on the money,
Yeah.
or definitely, I mean, I think for anybody that hasn't some kind of experience with ghosts or these days, I mean, you can't open the news anymore without there being a new thing about people like real actual government projects with UFOs and stuff. And
Yeah.
I think that, it's a shame that art wasn't around to see that happen. Although I think he knew very well that day would come.
I think if Art knew that TikTok was around the corner, he would have shut he would have shut the whole thing down because I can't turn TikTok on without getting a UFO video. I don't know what kind of algorithm I'm getting nailed with, but I'm getting nailed with something about UFOs.
I don't have TikTok. I mean, I think my manager has me have one. I only use Instagram because it's like it sounds weird, but it feels very beta and creative. It reminds me of Tumblr or of the first stuff I ever used interactively on Apple in that way where you can load music.
Right.
But everyone always talks about TikTok, and I'm just like, I've only seen it on the news, and I've only ever seen people dancing or doing experiments.
Yeah. Well, it's the cesspool that you probably expect it to be. That's probably the most accurate way of describing it.
Yeah, but that's the thing about Art Bell is I put it on and it could be a 3.5 hour show sometimes. And I like to listen to lectures or talk radio when I go to sleep. And Art Bell is my favorite. It's something very soothing about him. And even though that sounds so strange, it's pretty cool.
I do want to thank you to kind of start things off here. I mean, like you said, I know you're not doing a lot of interviews or haven't done a lot of interviews in the last couple of years, and I just want to say how much I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me tonight, and how happy I am to talk to you. I know this interviews cannot necessarily be the most comfortable thing for you or for anybody for that matter, but
No, I'm
thank
totally.
you.
Listen, no, I'm totally comfortable, and I love Boston. So, like, I mean, nothing's gonna stop me from talking to somebody from in Boston. Are you kidding?
Awesome, great. You know,
Yeah,
one of the things that is
go Sox, dude.
yeah, well, maybe not this year, but that's I'll take it.
Yeah, but I mean, but listen, but isn't that why we love them? Isn't that why we love the Red Sox? I mean, look, my manager got me into the Mets, and I didn't get it at first because the Sox were already out,
Right.
and but then I kind of understood. I went, the Mets are kind of like the Red Sox of like the boroughs in New York, and I got the vibe, and it kind of was like. I also thought to myself, I was like, I could see the guys in the Mets and the Red Sox hanging out in a pub in Boston and being totally fine.
Yeah.
Like Yankees are so big, but the Red Sox, the thing is though, is it's like I remember when I became a fan, the person that turned me on to the Red Sox said, "Welcome to a life of pain." And I was like, what are you talking about?
It's funny you bring up the Mets and the Red Sox. I mean, they played in the World Series in '86, and
yeah, what a game that was. What a game.
I was in college at the time, and I just remember just like wanting to throw my television out the window because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Thankfully, I didn't do that, and I was able to eventually graduate. Because I'm pretty sure I would have been expelled if I had tossed the TV out of a dormitory. But yeah, it's lifetime self abuse. That's they won their championships, but everything beyond that has been nothing but dreadfully painful.
Yeah, they kind of remind me of like the Replacements a little bit, and they kind of remind me of, in this weird way, sort of like Catcher in the Rye. Like they kind of remind me of that wiliness. Like they really are out there to play ball, and I think that's the difference. I think they really are out there to play inning by inning, and instead of it being kind of like we're here to win this particular, like all the games, I feel like they're very in the moment, and it's a thing. It's very pervasive to the attitude in Boston, because if you walk around Boston, like even the way that the city's set up is it's kind of set up for you to be cool wherever you are, and there are neighborhoods that are compartmentalized, and I think that has a lot to do with it. Also, let's all just admit that, like if for anyone that's been to the stadium to see the Red Sox, it's overwhelmingly cool.
It's very cool, but like you say, very much like the Replacements, it's also a shrine of self-sabotage.
Yeah, but like who else can say that they've had Big Papi on their roster?
I know.
I mean,
I know.
That guy will like walk up to the plate, and and for me it would be like like Luke Cage or like some superhero. Like it's so cool.
Yeah,
just endlessly cool.
I want to get into this a little bit because I mean, one of the things that I'm so fascinated by, with you is this, and it's always been true of you. This prolific output of music that you've been able to accumulate over 24 years. I mean, 29 albums over 24 years.
Is it really prolific though? Is it really prolific?
Well,
do we want to? I mean, are we saying that for other people's sake, or is that how you feel?
Well, I mean, when you compare it to other artists, most artists, if they're lucky, they'll do like one album every 5 years. You released 5 in a day. Most people, most artists never get a chance to do that, and it could be.
Yeah, well, you know what? Thank God for Richard Jones. Put it that way.
Right.
We don't do anything like anybody else. We make up our own rules.
Yeah, I agree. And the nice part about that is like, so even in the beginning of the year when you released all 5 of those records, they weren't just good records. You weren't just releasing them for the sake of releasing them. These were really good records.
Yeah, they're great records.
They were.
Yeah, I put a lot of love into those records.
I thought Heatwave was fantastic. Sword and Stone was awesome. I mean,
isn't that weird that you named Heatwave first? So everybody, that's the great thing about this experiment, or what some people would consider an experiment, is that everybody has got a different vibe. Everybody's like, oh man, I like this one, but this one is, it's like there's a whole deep, it's like canonizing for fans, especially after all the music that I've written in the past, that there's this sort of particular sweetness that certain, like, I kind of find that like urban sort of like New Yorkers, and of course, like people that live in big cities, like when I've seen any comments or heard any comments, my friends who live in the city really loved Heatwave.
Yeah.
And then Sword and Stone seemed to be my friends who love driving cars. Like it's like there's something different for everybody. And then, Prisoners, because I really wanted to reimagine that record as though it were the sadder parts of The Secret of My Success, like soundtrack, like David Foster. And interestingly enough, that record, I finally got this really cool text message from a friend who said, I always loved that record, but honestly, I never knew how deep that thing could go. It was a friend of mine having kind of like not a hard time, but an emotional time. And I guess he went down the wormhole, and he goes, I don't even understand how you did that. And I'm like, well, I went to Boston, I played the songs in the middle of my set, and then I had Daniel add these cool 80s things. It's just sort of a freedom of creating, like without any real worry about, I mean, it has to get through. Like I have to love it, and then obviously I have I ask questions and I have feedback and with my manager, and the kind of cool thing is it's like we're just up to no good. It's like him and me, and like we can ask. It's like we can ask a couple other people, but usually we're just dragging them into the whole Spanky's gang kind of thing, where like we're just basically just like up to no good, making crazy rock and roll records and getting on with it.
What's really cool about you doing that, and also the fact that you record and write in multiple styles and genres, and I often wonder when songwriters are able to do that, is it a matter out of they do it out of restlessness, or is it a matter of they're trying to challenge themselves to see if they can do it? Like, today I'm going to write a shit kicking country music song, and you do it, and it's awesome. It's like, is it more of do you do it out of the challenge, or you do it just out of restlessness?
That's a great question, and I'm glad to be asked that. That makes me know that when I was 13, 14 years old, and I was listening to Bob Dylan, and my mom had given me a Bob Dylan record, and because I was stuck in this R&B phase, and then I got into metal after that. But I had a really very brief soiree with a couple. It was another side of Bob Dylan, which is a pretty unusual record to have and start with. And they were all story songs. And I remember then I got a book about him, and I told myself, this is what I'm going to do for a living. Like, I was like, I know exactly how to do this. But one of the things to say about style, right, is the way that you mentioned, like, you get up one day and say, I'm going to write a shit kicking country song. That right immediately when you said that I got this little thing in me that went, ooh, I want to write I was like, I want to see if I can outdo myself and write a really great country song, right? But really, the thing is there's a couple of ways of writing. One of them is some songs are born of necessity, and the songs that are born of necessity don't always necessarily mean that they're going to be good, but oftentimes they're very important either way.
Yeah.
I made a record called 29 that at the time my label Lost Highway, who were a subsidiary of Mercury and Universal, and they were a horror show to be on, like truly. And I had and even though I made peace with him, like the main guy from country at the time, Luke Lewis, ran it, and he was like, "Oh, come to our label and you can do anything you want." Well, that was the least of the things I was able to do, but I did it anyway. I just would go take my I wasn't making any money from them. I never made a dime, and I would take my own money and go to the studio. And when I made 29, they rejected it, and I called them and I go, "Well, I'm not going to go on tour anymore unless you release it." And then they decided to release it like December 17th. Talk about burying a record. Like, and
Right.
the weird thing is now, like if I go to one of my concerts and don't play a song from that record, I'm gonna have to fight my way out of there. Like it's really important. And
Yeah.
that's a record born of that's a record born of necessity. But my thing is this is, I made it I made a large well, I don't want to say I made a sacrifice in my life to be this kind of full-time creative kind of person, because it isn't always creative. A lot of times it's listening to records and reading books and filling the bath, like filling the tank back up, and before the fission of life turns it back into the steam of whatever you make. But there's a thing where I don't understand people that aren't creative. Like if I'm
Hmm.
watching baseball, sketching in my art books, and then some friend will come over and be like, there's 40 you have 40 art books in the corner, and I'm like, well, I just sketch when I'm watching TV. Sometimes it's boring. I like cable, I like old school TV, and unless it's moonlighting or something, I'm just going to watch standard TV, watch an old Western, and then for writing songs, I don't intend to do it, but the thing is a lot of times I've lied to producers. It's the greatest thing in the world. I can look back on it now and laugh. I totally, completely lied to Ethan Johns, and I said, "Oh, I got a great new record called Gold." I just named it that, like, and because I remembered what L.A. looked like at the time. I lived in New York, I think, and I said, "Oh, it's got some great songs on it." And he said, "What? name a couple songs, and I'm like, and I had just watched a documentary on redshift, which is a scientific principle. For anyone out there that doesn't know what redshift is astronomers or astrophysicists can tell if an object in space is moving away from us or closer to us, or a galaxy, vice versa, by whether the wave pattern it comes back at us is blue or red. And so, but I had written down when the stars go blue because I thought that was kind of sad, and as a title, and I had like maybe two other titles, and so I just said, "Oh yeah," and I named them. And he goes, "Those sound really compelling." And he's like, "As before, you could really, it's before email and stuff, so you could play a couple chords over the phone." And he goes, he's like, "I'm just gonna book the studio, but between you and me, like, I didn't have any of those songs at all until the night before." And so I was like, "I'll give you the song list later." And I would just go to the bar the night before and sit at the bar, and I would think about a song I loved, think about an open structure of chords, and I would just write the lyrics out in my songbook, wake up, take a couple of aspirin, get down to the studio, and then I just kind of picked up the guitar and I went like, I just started playing an A, and I knew, of course, choruses are good in like E and D or etc. Like I used a simple format, and the only thing that I had to do is go pray that there would be a coda or a hook of a musical
That
little,
that's like that's like magic. I mean, that thing that's not music coming to you. It's almost like it's coming through you. I don't know if it's a matter of
yeah,
deadline
yeah.
or whatever, but it seems like there's a structure within chaos.
I can explain that though. So I believe that when you write songs, you don't have I've explained to people on the BBC. I did a thing where I explained a process. If someone has writer's block, they could use this process that I came up with called stacks, where you basically take two unrelated books on either side of a typewriter, and you just open them to a random page until you find a word that strikes you in a particular way. Then you open the dictionary and you find another word that strikes you in a particular way. And then you find a sentence in a bad, like, or like a Daniel Steele romance novel or just some random novel. And it's just a sentence of conversation. And I'm like, if you load the page up with those things, your mind will create an ad lib for them. But I sincerely believe, and it has come to fruition so many times in my life, that when I wrote a song that I didn't necessarily understand what it meant at the time, later on, I will sing that song and it will have such vast meaning, because there's a thing about writing the song where, some people believe in linear time and a time grid or a scroll. I don't really think there is a past or future. I think that, I think we're just here. And even though we see changes, I sort of think that if you write a song, and even if it doesn't come true for you, or if it's goofy or whatever, I think the universe feels more playful when it's allowed to work its magic through you. I kind of think that's sort of what we are. Like we think we're kind of one big neurological, emotional brain, and the universe did this crazy trick where it went, well, on this one particular planet, I'm going to create these strange, wily people, and they're going to, probably cause a lot of harm, but also they're going to make art and they're going to look back so I can see what I'm like. And I kind of feel like I have this sort of agreement with the universe where and God, to that extent, where I sort of go, a lot of people, they pray every day and they pray for things that they want. Well, I get up and I like tell God a joke every day. Like that's my thing. I go, I was like, I know your lines are clogged with requests. So check out this terrible joke that I read in this, 150 jokes to tell at dinner from like 1953. And, and in some ways, I think that could also explain my writing process. Although, to be square with you, the concept of a record and what it should mean as a whole, that is usually something that I imagine in an abstract way before it's created. I will kind of know. I don't believe in the cause and effect. I don't ever think I'm making this record and it's going to make me rich. In fact, I think the idea of making a record and believing of what its purpose is at all is breaking your contract with the muse. I think for me that the idea is I can think about it in terms of like what's the side closer, what's the side opener, and what parts of me do I want to leave in this record because I'm later on going to forget them or remember them in a particular way, or how honest and raw can I be, even vocally, so that the person listening can actually imagine the words and the soundscape as their own dialogue? Because that's what I've loved in music. Robert Smith did that for me with like Disintegration um and and on my Joy Division records when I was growing up. Like I felt like they were kind of creating this place for me to go. Bob Mould and Husker Du, the same thing. Like I kind of think that even to some extent, the Smiths, a lot of people are so in love with the Smiths and the bands that we all covet. It's because that narrator can create a structure and then get out of its way. Bruce Springsteen does it all the time. He
Sure.
cosplays as the guy that works at like the loading dock at Amazon, but he's a billionaire with a horse farm. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, and it doesn't mean that what he's writing is disingenuous. It just means that he can tap into that frame of mind.
Let me ask you this, because with all of what you've just said, and it's all fascinating the way you're articulating it. You're going back and releasing Blackhole this month, which is an album that you started and shelved like 15 years ago or however long it's been, and now it's being released. This is a record that had been bootlegged for years. There was always a lot of speculation about it.
Yeah, I
What,
mean, I've seen some of the bootleg track listings, and they're incorrect.
of
And
course,
also, I don't think anyone's heard this version. Like the versions that have slipped out, I'm relatively sure they were listening to something that they think is Blackhole, but it wasn't. They're
right.
like, because a fan, before I could even get off of Instagram, one guy goes, "I hope you put out the real Blackhole and all of the sessions at some point." That was that's a good problem to have for a fan to be that obsessive. But in
Sure.
my weird way, I wanted to be like, I'm making you dinner, and a record. It's like I'm your mom or dad. I'm making dinner. You're hungry and at the table, but like before I can even finish like making the steaks, like, can you just let me finish making the meal and serve it to you? Like, and like, don't go like after that. Well, I also know that you got some, Fruit Loops in there somewhere. I'm like, well, yeah, but you know what I mean? It's a very interesting thing.
So what was
Yeah.
what was the thought behind releasing it now and having like a new I don't know, like a new lens on something that's been kind of in the works or on the shelf for 15 years?
Well,
Did you
I've always loved it, but as soon as we release it, I can play the songs live and justify that. And also, I've always wanted to do the archive series where I could kind of like go and rescue some of these records, because there's many that people have never heard. They think they've heard everything, but I've kept more things on 2-inch tape or on a drive that people haven't heard. I have more things on release than I've released. But honestly, like I have to shout it out to my manager. Like he's fearless and believes in art, and like he flies the flag of art and doing things your own way. And I think it goes to show that, I mean, this is a man that he could lead the way forward for a band like the Pixies, the most beautiful and unusual band that literally I can't think. They're the Velvet Underground of now. I can't
Yeah.
think of anybody that doesn't reference them, from the heaviest band to the poppiest band. Those guys have been setting the weird standard forever. And also, if you really listen to the Pixies, they literally sound like they're like graduates from the University of Mars. Everything they're doing makes no sense, but somehow it totally works. It's wild. But he also works with Dead Can Dance, and to me, they are the Sonic Youth, so to speak, or the Grateful Dead of goth music, but wildly important to me. So, I'm just lucky. I'm able to work with someone who kind of believes in me and believes in my art and believes that there's an audience for it, and that and like even if I release like a punk record like 1985 or 1984, that style, it has meaning, and we put it out because it means something to me, and we like it and it's good, and sort of have faith that it'll records find their people, just kind of like books,
Hmm.
and hopefully like rescue pets, they find their owner,
Yeah.
and that's the best that you can hope for them. And in my case, it seems to have been, that's always the story. It's the least likely ones too, the ones I think that no one will ever care about, that it's something I only spent 3 minutes on, I didn't even think about it, and then the song ends up in a movie or something. And
Those are the ones that connect with people. Yeah, you hear that all the time. The people that spent the least amount of time working on a song, that song winds up becoming the biggest hit of
you
their
know why
career.
that is because those songs have the least noise or static. There's
Yeah.
like the lesser the thought there is in the song, the more the likelihood that that song can connect to a wider audience or more people. Because I think that songs that come to you without thinking and just hit the page, even if they don't feel like and don't exude your best writing, I think that there's a more universal groupthink in them. And I think that for a lot of artists, they then disavow those songs. Like REM never liked their song Stand, but Stand was a perfectly cool 60s throwback song. I loved it. And yeah, it's like you just kind of have to embrace the process.
I don't want to pick at old scabs about the specifics of what happened in 2019. I mean, you apologize for it. People can certainly choose where they want to land. And I'm certainly not going to pass any judgment on anybody or for any reason. But you certainly have paid a price for what happened back then, rightly or wrongly. But tell me about the cost of that and the process of recovering from that kind of situation.
Well, I think saying I paid a price is a little extreme. Um, I think if anything, I was liberated from a lot of things that, a lot of situations, and a way of living, of constantly touring, constantly doing interviews, constantly knocking on doors for my records to the point of exhaustion. I think a lot of that's been confused with the fact that, um, to put it to you in a plainest way possible, because the dialogue of this story has been dialogue of my story. It as a sober person, as a person who does therapy every week, as a person who has had suffered lifelong depression, as a person who lost my older brother, my best friend, to the effects of depression and alcoholism, and ultimately more or less took his own life. I had only just finished the Prisoner tour. And while I was on stage for the last show of that tour, I walked off stage, and my brother, who had been sick on and off, I was told when I got to the hotel that he had died.
Mm.
And I didn't think I could go back on stage. But some of the same people that later would go to that article and say that I was a disagreeable person, because if you really read the article, it'll there are things that say like, I didn't have an acoustic guitar to use on tour and he loaned me one. I mean, we didn't sleep together or anything.
Right.
There's like there's a statement like that, and I want and I read it sometimes and I think rationally and go, oh my god, like what's next? Am I gonna, or like, am I gonna, I'm gonna wash her car? Like, also, this is not cockiness in saying this, and it's important to say this. I think the idea of imagining me, a person without any platinum records, person that's never had a number one song, person that doesn't have a yacht, a helicopter, right?
Right.
Just a guy that makes rock records and lots of them, and it's been as helpful as possible. I think I think and also, I'm not saying I'm the best looking guy, but I was a pretty good looking guy, like, and funny despite all of my, despite the problems that we all have and we all go through. My job has been, I used to be a plumber, and now I write deeper stuff and sometimes and talk about things that we don't want to talk about. That's my job. I mean, there's zippity doodah songs out there, and there's plenty of heavy songs out there, and I love all that stuff too. And But for me, writing is, I really do express the fact that I have struggled with depression my whole life. It's an unfortunate thing, and some people think that depression just means I'm choosing to be sad. That's not the
No,
case.
not at
A
all.
person with no, a person with depression wakes up every day, and there's another you, and that other you tells you, why are you even here? And I've never hidden that from anyone. And every person in that article, you could go find, if someone wants to take the time, when my brother died and my sobriety slipped away, every person in there said, I love you and I'm sorry. If I can do anything, let me know, including my ex-wife. All of them, all of them. But the hysteria of me being this monster or whatever is absolutely and totally and completely false.
Well, I think
And
one of the things that is true. I mean, because you talked a little bit about it before about you when you write music. For some people, when they are in the darkest times, they try to do whatever they can to find ways of distracting themselves, and it could be self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. It could just be immersing themselves in the work. And I think part of your journey here is that you really did immerse
no,
yourself
no, no,
in the
no,
work.
no, no. But I want to say this. I went through a public divorce.
Right.
I went through a year and a half of trying to fix things. In that time, we were separated quietly. So, so then all of a sudden, if I was dating someone, my ex-wife was dating someone while we were still married. That's a normal thing if you're in a marriage for over 5, 6 years. There's going to be a year where you try to figure out if you're going to get back together or not. And during this time, she found her current husband, and that's great. She wanted someone to write music with, and I always said, this can't be part of our relationship. It's too sacred to me. I can't write with anyone. I can write specifically for someone if they need that to happen, but I can't imagine writing a record with my wife, and that would make no sense to me. But in the article itself, that's one of the complaints. And then there's another complaint that says, oh, it was jamming and we were playing acoustic guitar and we played some songs and then kind of made out and then but but we didn't sleep together and then that was it.
Yeah.
Like if you break apart some of what the complaint, if you really look at it from any kind of I believe if you are an objective person and you look at what's being said, is I know for a fact that there was a time, at least when I was growing up, when there was hair metal bands and rock bands and metal bands who still to this day I believe exist with a different rule set. I think that it's important to explain to people that in music, if someone's like, "Oh, he dated this musician and that musician," I'm like, where am I going to meet a neurosurgeon or a brain surgeon, or where am I going to I mean, you're inside a tin can, a tour bus, and you drive at night to the next city. You get there, right, and then you're at sound check, and then you play the show. You get something to eat, you get back on the bus, and it drives at night again. And I did that for a year and a half while my brother was dying. And I
Yeah.
could not get to him. And I had this feet, and he kept telling me, it's okay, I'm okay, because that's how my brother was. But when I lost my brother, he's my brother. My sister is still alive. I'm her older brother now. I have to be I have to be Chris and me for her.
Mm.
Because my sister will always be she's my younger sister, but I always say she's my younger sister. But Chris and I always were there to protect Courtney. And also I grew up with very tough Southern women. And when I look back at the stuff, I go, men who mistreat women and yell at them and call them names or curse at them, that would never float around me. And you can ask anyone that I worked with. And the unfortunate thing is, I'm sorry to say this, and if this gets me in any kind of trouble, it might be worth it. But if anyone thinks that the New York Times don't have an actual end game and didn't go through different channels to set up that story until they could find some way to do it, then you haven't looked closer at the damage that they've done to other people also. Because let's remember this too. This is the same newspaper that told the whole United States that there was weapons of mass destruction in another country and cost hundreds of thousands of lives, American lives. And like in this case, I kind of looked at this and go, you're the New York Times. Why are you writing about musicians and how they correlate? Why are you hunting artists? It seems very bizarre to me. And it seems to me like here's an expression that Bob Mould told me. He said, everybody wants to date the astronaut, and everybody wants to be part of the gang when the astronauts are getting in the capsule and the Saturn V rocket and they're going to go to the moon. And they want to get as close as they can to those people. And then when that thing takes off, everybody gets burned. And the closer you are, the more burned you get. And that's a lot of times what happens with fame, or you see someone on a late night TV show. But if anybody can actually, anyone that's ever listened to my lyrics or understood me as a person, all of the women who were interviewed, because I had 11 people who in my crew who were women. And you know what's funny? They would call them and say, they would say to the people that they were calling, they're like, we've spoken to over 25 women, and we want you to add your voice to this. But what's interesting is all of the people who didn't agree and said, you're crazy. He's a depressed, funny guy. He's just kind of a cut up. He's just like an old school cut up. They didn't include any of that. They didn't include any of their stories in that piece. And to this day, there are musicians like Catherine Popper, who I played with. She told me that those women who did get together and did benefit from the burning me in effigy, right? Like, because they took my music off the radio and put Phoebe Bridgers' music on the radio. But you do know that she's in a lawsuit right now, right? Where she's getting sued for over $4 million because she did the same thing to someone else, right? Same thing. So what's interesting here is I'm as a sober guy, I'm a dad, I'm a sober guy, I'm turning 50. I'm not looking to cause any trouble, but I've always had lifelong depression. But I know one thing is that no one in my crew would ever speak about women in any kind of an uncouth way. They would be out the door so fast that their head would be spinning around. And the interesting thing is that is what the people who were around me, including the female producers I have worked with, they would not listen to them. So that's why the stories had to be, he loaned me an acoustic guitar because I didn't have one to go on tour. And I'd be like, how is that weird? Or
Yeah.
a story like, he answered the hotel door in a robe. First of all, I am so scared of hotels. I stay in the bus. And second of all, I say I'm a hypochondriac. I would never put one of those things on me or whatever. I mean, you like Danzig is the kind of guy that should be on stage with the shirt off, not me. I'm gross looking. It's not my vibe. I mean, like, look, if like I understand all that stuff, and I understand what was happening on a bigger scale. And I understood that, I don't know whether you know this or not, but there was a list of people and they were going down that list and they were looking for eligible candidates. And it's a very organized thing. And there are whisper groups. And the idea is to bastardize. Like, I think it's this idea that, and men deserve this too, is to kind of knock men down a couple of notches and make the playing field more equal. And I believe that that's necessary, but I do not agree with how it is being done. The same thing that Bill Maher said. He goes, this is long overdue. And there are some really bad people that have done terrible things that needed to be addressed and removed. But if you're going to go and you're going to assail everybody who's 46 years old 47 years old, and just out of a 7-year divorce, right? Social media didn't exist when I got married. It did
Yeah.
when I got divorced. And I wasn't on it when I got divorced. And I didn't understand it. It wasn't part, I didn't care about any of that stuff. And I think that looking back at that, I just thought I was trying to find my person. And I would hear stuff where people would say, "Oh, he told me he wanted to get married." And another woman would say, "He said that to me too." And I was like, "Yeah, I didn't say I want to marry you." I go, "I don't want to be in a relationship that doesn't have the potential to be fruitful enough to become married." So how is that a problem? I just don't. I mean, I find Winger more problematic than anything I've ever done. And honestly, nobody and if it's believe all women, then why is nobody believing? But then why is it they'll overlook the fact when someone goes, "I'm misled to this person, we never met, nothing ever happened," and what was being said is being taken out of context. So you're not allowed to believe that because it doesn't fit the dialogue. It's just not rational and sensible. And by the way, as a father of a 3.5-year-old, I am disgusted at the idea that somebody would call me a lech. That is so improbable. And every person I've ever dated, pretty much everybody knew about them because for some reason, since I've been 18 or 19 years old, my life has been in Rolling Stone or in the public. And remember, it was only recently after they used to reward people for the crazier that they were and the more punk rock they were and the weirder that they were or the more drama that there was. When it became time to erase people as part of this whole thing, Rolling Stone, the Grammys, all of these institutions, the Recording Academy, they have pretended like I don't exist. And you know what? Thank you. I have more time to work on records. I don't even need them. And like honestly, what was I doing there in the first place? Because that's not it was never part of my plan. My plan was to make special important records that spoke to loners and people with depression issues like I had and my brother had. And I lost my brother. He died. And then 6 months later, they did that to me. So like, you know what? Like I'm sorry to say this, but like, you know, I disagree. I'll always disagree. I'm horrified. And and I've always wanted to say this, and I feel like I'm turning 50 so I can speak freely. But the New York Times can kiss my whole asshole. Fuck them. How dare they? And like honestly, learn to apologize and learn to find the good and find ways to bring people together. Because if page clicks are if you're running out of page clicks, right? And the only thing you can think of is by starting a culture war between men and women, then just stop.
Ryan, I think one of the things that is in play here, actually, there's two things, and bad on one, but okay on the other. The first one is, I think we live very much in a culture where social media has caused us to hide our aggression and hide behind, avatars and, seek out ways to
Yeah,
disembowel.
feelings and facts, and
Yeah,
facts are feelings. Yeah,
right. And that disembowelment and that social canceling pig pile that you've seen over and over again isn't just about people that may have offended a certain movement. It's what journalism has become, and the New York Times is not
well,
immune to
yeah,
that. But here's the thing. Here's the good part. I think this is the silver lining for a guy like you. Your fans are going to love Ryan Adams no matter what.
well,
And
no, I
and you're
believe that they're literate. I believe that my fans are literate and sensible, and I think that they had a good idea about who I was. And I think that if you really, I think looking back at that article and the doubling down of it, and also, has anyone? I've always wanted to say this stuff. Turning 50 is so liberating. I'm 50. I can kick and punch. Remember that skit on SNL?
I do.
Listen, the guy that wrote the article is his mentor is Jim DeRogatis. Anyone that knows the history of me knows that Jim DeRogatis from the Chicago Sun-Times has been after me forever. I would go and play 2 nights in like the big Beethoven-looking Chicago place, and he would write about it like I had, like I was on stage, like killing baby goats or something. And I just remember I called him and I was like, stop going to the concerts because they're sold out. And it's one more seat that you're taking that a fan isn't getting. We get it. You don't like the music. So stop. So just stop coming. Like I think I might have said like, you fucking Jabba the Hutt dick. Like I mean, and that's because that's okay. Like that's okay to speak freely. That's okay to have a difference of opinion. And that was okay for him to not like it. But the guy, they tried to write this article in the New York Times once and it didn't work. And it's because I was able to actually contact the person. I will not say who it was. And I wrote to that person and said, well, I remember hanging out with you at my house with you asking me for guitar lessons. And, and I'm acutely aware of what you're trying to do. And I'm like, if you want to go there with me, when I was a kid, I was a boxer. I will not go down in the round.
Yeah.
You're going to see. And you know what? He passed it to this guy named Joe. And if anybody ever out there wants to do any investigative journalism, that guy had a Tumblr blog that was a hate blog about my music. And when I raised $30,000 for the Bowery mission by making art in the old CBGB space and then doing an auction for that art, he wrote a negative review of me having literally spent 2 weeks to create and raise as much awareness and money as I could for people who were in recovery, because I was in recovery, and recovery is a super important thing to me. And when people want to get sober and change their lives and find redemption, I'm like, hell yes.
Yeah.
And like, how can I help if I could just play guitar? And that was how I did it. And so the co-author, the New York Times own standards and principles say that if a person had a grudge against someone and they're writing an inflammatory article where they're taking that person down, if they had a pre-existing bias of more than 6 to 8 months, they should not be involved in the article. This guy, a year and a half before the article came out, said somebody's in trouble, but I'm not going to say who, on his Twitter, and then would just have my name on a piece of paper, and he would have he would highlight it in yellow. And he would say things like, I won't say the artist, but it's a female artist that, is very, very good. And I always said is amazing. But he was like, so-and-so is the GOAT, and basically pledging his love for that person. But in my mind, I was like, can't you just love that person and not try to assail someone else? Like
It winds up become very transactional that way, and it's unfortunate. But here's the thing, Ryan, and as much vitriol has been thrown your way, the important thing to keep in mind is the fans who love your music because it speaks louder to them than anything the New York Times is ever going to write about.
Why my fans are still here?
They love your music.
It's more than that. This was a dirty trick. And this was a dirty trick by people who thought that hurting someone else would put them into the limelight. The New York Times gave those people coverage because there was a question of, well, who are you really exploiting? Aren't you exploiting these women by telling the story? That's basically like, you're just airing relationship grievances. And like, we're all different. If I wanted to date different people to find someone that was appropriate for me, that's my own business. It's not the business of the public. But what it was I write about all of these things, and the social death that article caused me at first was destructive. But you know what? I got myself into grief therapy. I've always been in therapy, but I doubled up on my therapy. I still do therapy every week and double up when I need it. But what I was able to understand after all of that, right, was that someone else's opinion about who I was, I didn't see anyone say, he said some curse word or called someone a horrible name or, was physically abusive. Like, I didn't see any of that stuff because it doesn't exist. And I didn't even see someone saying, oh, like, if you like, I'll make you a star. Like, because how could I say that to someone when I'm not one? I'm a working class songwriter. I've always been. But the reason that my fans came back around is because I decided to be transparent and show everybody what was happening and talk about my brother. And I sincerely believe it's because I have a very deep relationship with God. I have a very deep relationship with the deeper meaning of my truth and what I'm doing here. And they made me a Darth Vader mask. They made me into Frankenstein, into a monster. And then they held out that mask to me and said, now swing back. Because that's what they wanted me to do. They wanted me to get so mad that I would turn into the person that they were characterizing me as. Me while I'm mourning my dead brother.
Yeah.
How dare they? How fucking dare anyone ever treat anyone this way? Jean-Michel Basquiat had depression. He had drug problems. He was definitely a person that like didn't always know the right answer or do the right thing. But would you lock him up or canonize him? Would you destroy him in the New York Times if he were alive today? These things bother me. And I believe that the main reason that my fans are still there for me is because I did not let the New York Times and that fucking, like, honestly, like that, like, you know, John Steinbeck wannabe nightmare, post collegiate weak writer. I did not let him make my heart brittle. He put me back in the ring harder. I make music now. I sit on the stage and I've never been so hardwired into my heart. And my heart's never been so hardwired into loving the audience that's there in front of me. And it's growing and it's bigger and it's more beautiful. And so from this terrible thing that had to happen, which hurt my family, hurt my sister, hurt, my loved ones, has caused great damage. Most people don't know this, but it resulted in a death of someone I used to be in a band with. They hung themselves because the same very thing was then being posited to happen to that person. This is terrible. This is not how you solve things. And music is here to try to tell us that there's a little bit more to love in life, or at the very least, like the Cure records or the Replacements or the Lemonheads, or, like these records are there to be our friends when we don't have any. And thank God I'm a musician, because all the fleas got shook off of me. 98% of the people I talked to skipped town. And people like John Mayer quit talking to me, but I knew he had to. It was like it was stuff that it's like I'm sure people were like, you've already been in enough trouble yourself. And there's like certain aspects to it that have been really destructive. But the overall thing about it is I look at this and think, we only have a couple of places left, like these vestiges of where art is sacred, and those places are in books and in movies and in music, and the people that make those kinds of things, specifically if it's going to be for their whole life, how could you ever expect them to be normal? How
Yeah.
could you expect someone that's been... William Faulkner used to wake up in a tree. They'd have to drag him out of the tree because he drove himself nuts. Hemingway, shot himself with the shotgun. I mean, there is a price to pay for dedicating your entire life to your craft and ceaselessly never wanting to stop doing it. But then to go and take that away from the only thing the person had. When my grandmother was dying of stomach cancer, I was there with my ex-wife, and she looked at her and said, he's never had anything in this world but me and his music and his art. Don't you never take that away from him.
Yeah.
And she passed away a couple of hours after that. And I will never, ever forget that. And I will never, ever forget that, like, the letting go of things, the being a better father thing, the understanding the duality of people and how that they can sometimes become like the satanic panic of the 80s. Everyone is a Satanist and blah, blah, blah because of Slayer. the idea that, all men are pervasively ungentlemanly and already have designs on women. I do not accept generalizations. Generalizations got us, world of ours, into terrible, terrible places every time. And I just think everyone can do better. Everyone can do better. And the funny thing is that when there's art there for people, they do better because they have a place to turn. So I sort of look at this stuff and the things that were said and this idea of the crazy stuff in Rolling Stone. He's a computer cyber hacker. I'm just like, are you kidding me? I can't even like work my Dropbox. Ask my manager. I can't. I like literally don't even care. I don't even have a laptop. Like it's just all so silly. It's like everybody. It's like it's like everybody go. It's like everybody go and get an Amy Hempel book, and go get a Mad Libs book, and go get a crosswords book, and get busy. Like get busy making stuff. We're gonna be in our 70s and 80s soon. You're gonna look back and go, I spent my whole life waging a war that could never be won, and B, like undermined the joy and created a joyless world. I mean, I just can't get behind it.
Ryan, I appreciate the time that you spent here. This has been an extraordinary conversation, and to have you, to be so candid is remarkable. You're going to be at the Bosch Center in Boston at the Schubert Theater on November 25th. It's definitely a show that everyone should try to get into. Ryan, this has been a real eye-opening conversation, and I really do appreciate your time today.
I think it's important that everybody knows that when I go to the show, it's a joyful, loving experience. And like, I sit down and like, it starts with Sweet Carolina. And from there, we get into all of the deepest places and covers and it's 3 hours of all I can actually tap into. And it's fun and cool. And if I made a comment that someone doesn't agree with, I want them to know that I accept and believe, and I honor and I encourage other opinions. I think it's important that we all have them, and it's important to have them and feel safe to have them. So thank you.
Ryan, have yourself a great night, and all the best.
I also wish the Red Sox all the best next year. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Ryan Adams is coming to the Bosch Center in Boston at the Schubert Theater on November 25th. He'll also be releasing his long overdue album, Blackhole, later this month as well. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Even if you hated it, you can always email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram of Chicopee for their support. But most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.